Hey guys, it's Cheryl from Woodshop Diaries, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I built this pantry cabinet. Much like basically any other type of cabinet, pantry cabinets are often customized. I've seen some pretty elaborate designs for pantry cabinets, but for this particular project, I'm keeping things simple, and I'll show you how to add adjustable shelves and pull out storage drawers. This particular cabinet is going to be going into my parents' garage, but this same thing could be built for your kitchen, bathroom, home office, or anywhere else that you might need a large storage cabinet. You'll see this cabinet again, plus everything else that I'm building for my parents' garage in the next video, so be sure to stay tuned. But in the meantime, if you want to see how this particular cabinet came together, let's go. To get started, like most cabinet building projects, I began by cutting down my plywood sheets. I ripped 2 strips from my sheet for the 2 side panels of the pantry. These panels were about 22 inches wide, and I saved the leftover strip to use for supports later. Then I had to rip one more 22-inch wide strip from another plywood sheet to cut the top, bottom, and middle panels from. I trimmed this strip down into 3 panels about 31 3/4 inches long. Then I trimmed that leftover plywood strip from the first sheet down into 2 pieces the same length for the back supports. Cutting a toe kick in a pantry cabinet is completely optional. Most kitchen pantry cabinets have toe kicks. I assume that's probably so that they'll match the base cabinets, but as a standalone storage cabinet, it's really not necessary, so feel free to skip this part if you want. But just like I would for a typical base cabinet, I marked and cut the front bottom corner out of the 2 side panels for the toe kick using my jigsaw. Once I had my 2 large side panels, a top, bottom, and middle, plus 2 support strips cut, I sanded each piece well before assembling. I drilled 3/4 inch pocket holes into the ends of the top, bottom, and middle panels and into the ends of the 2 support strips. Then I assembled using pocket hole screws. As a quick reminder, cabinets can be made frameless or with a face frame. Frameless means that the front edge of the cabinet is simply the plywood edge, but face frame cabinets have an additional frame added onto the front. Usually, when I'm assembling frameless cabinets, I install the bottom panel flush to the bottom of the toe kick. But since I'm adding a face frame to this cabinet, I installed the bottom panel about 5/8 inches up from the toe kick. That way, when I add the face frame later, the bottom panel will be just below the frame opening. I installed the middle panel about 24 inches down from the top. Now, you can pretty much place this however far up or down the cabinet that you prefer. In my case, I wanted a larger bottom section and a smaller top section, but depending on your needs, you may prefer different spacing. The 2 support strips will be used to install the cabinet to the wall later, so I added these directly below the top and the middle panels. Now the main cabinet body is together, so I moved on to adding the face frame. I assembled my face frame from pre-primed pine 1x2s, except on the top and the right side. The right side of this cabinet will butt up against a wall in the garage when it's installed. In order to give the door plenty of room to open and close on that side and to accommodate for any unsquared drywall corners, I used a 1x3 on the right side. This extra inch of material will overhang the side of the cabinet to act as kind of a built-in filler strip. For the top, I also used a 1x3 instead of a 1x2 because I like to leave some extra material to be able to nail molding onto if desired. In this case, since it's just a garage cabinet, I'm not planning on adding any molding around the top, but if this was going into something like a kitchen, this thicker top would make installing crown molding much easier than having to add additional blocking later to nail to. I used the Craig Micro pocket hole jig to assemble this face frame using pocket hole screws, then I glued and nailed it onto the front of the cabinet. I flipped the cabinet over and cut a piece of 1/4-inch plywood to fit over the backside. Now, if you wanted, you could definitely cut dados or rabbets to install the back panel, but I just stapled it in place. This back panel isn't really even necessary, but it does help sturdy the cabinet up a little and hold it square. Now that the cabinet body is together, I started working on the doors. I have a whole video on 7 ways to make a cabinet door if you wanted to make a totally different style, but for these, first I cut them down from 1/2-inch plywood. Originally, I planned to make the top section of the cabinet one large door and then have 2 tall skinny doors for the bottom section. Plans obviously changed somewhere along the way, but we will get there in a minute. For now, I cut my plywood sheet into 3 doors. Then I cut 1/4-inch plywood strips about 2.5 inches wide to add onto the front of each door to kind of fake a frame and panel style door. I cut these strips to fit and just glue them onto the front of all 3 doors. If you watched my 7 ways to build a door video, this is method number 2. While the glue was drying on these, I moved on to customizing the inside of the cabinet. For this cabinet, I wanted to show both options: simple adjustable shelves and pull-out drawer shelves. You can definitely mix and match or do one or the other for the whole cabinet, however you want. But for the pull-out drawer shelves, I measured and marked where I wanted them to go. I installed one about 14 inches up from the bottom and the other about 12 inches up from that. Because of the face frame, I needed to add some spacer blocks in here to mount the drawer slides onto. So I glued and screwed some scrap 3/4-inch plywood strips onto the cabinet sides, then mounted 20-inch drawer slides onto those. I repeated for the other side of the cabinet so that I had 2 pair of slides installed for the 2 pull-out shelves. And now I needed to actually build them. These shelves are basically really shallow drawer boxes. However, I did not make these drawers like I usually make drawers. Okay, so I'm building 2 pull-out drawers for the pantry. They're gonna be real shallow drawers, most likely. Since this is going in my parents' garage, they're probably gonna use these for storing paint cans. Paint cans can be heavy. Bubby, normally I use 1/4-inch plywood for drawer bottoms, but since I'm making these like super shallow, the sides are only about 2 inches. If this was a drawer box, like a full drawer box, and like the sides were, 4 to 5 inches tall, I would trust that to be enough support for the drawer bottom that it wouldn't sag. But since these are only 2 inches tall, I'm afraid that the plywood would sag and this would also sag and not support the weight. Probably it would be fine, but just in case, I'm going ahead and using 3/4-inch plywood for the drawer bottom. Probably a little overkill. Since we had planned for these drawers to be holding heavy items and the sides weren't very tall, I went ahead and made the bottoms 3/4 inches thick versus my usual 1/4 inch. To be honest, in hindsight, 1/4 inch would probably have been fine, but oh well. I cut down a bottom and all 4 sides to build the drawers. Then I assembled using pocket holes and screws. I only used pocket holes around the bottom panel so that I could attach the sides to it. But I also added a screw at each corner to attach the sides together at the top. To install these onto the cabinet, I removed the part of the drawer slide that attaches to the drawer and just screwed these onto the sides of each shelf. Then I could slide them in. I'll come back later and add adjustable shelves above these, but for now I moved back to the doors since the glue had dried on the trim. To cover the plywood edges that will be seen, I added iron-on edge banding to the outside edges of the doors. Then I drilled the hinge cup holes in each door to install the concealed hinges into. Since the bottom doors were so tall, I used 3 hinges on each one. One toward the top, one toward the bottom, and one in the middle. This middle hinge will help keep the door from flexing. Once the hinges were on the doors, I installed them onto the cabinet. I used my foot as an extra hand to hold the door in place while I secured it. Now, the 2 bottom doors were good, so I moved to the top door. Originally, I planned for this to be like a lift-up door, so I installed the hinges at the top and added some gas struts to hold the door open. I was so proud of myself. I got everything installed and adjusted, and then once I got off the ladder, I realized that I couldn't reach to close the door after it was lifted. So the thing I didn't think about with this is that once the door is up all the way, you have to have a ladder to get it back down. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. So I'm gonna take it off and then cut it in half. Now, I could have definitely just tied a string to pull it down, but after some consideration, I decided it was probably best to just switch gears and change my idea. So I ripped this door in half, added some additional trim, and filled the hinge cup holes on the backside with a piece of dowel and some wood filler. Live and learn. Sometimes you just have to pivot, and to be honest, I think that the 2 smaller doors look a lot better in the end than the 1 big door would have. So this was probably for the best. I had forgotten that I needed to go ahead and attach a toe kick. Normally, I install the toe kick after installing the cabinet, but in this case, since it's a standalone cabinet, I went ahead and just glued and nailed a piece of plywood across the front in the bottom corner. And after a final sanding, I took the doors back off to make painting easier, then primed the doors and the cabinet separately. After primer, I painted them in Sherwin-Williams software. It's a dark gray that surprisingly looked a lot more blue than I intended in natural lighting, but I think it turned out well. While the paint was drying, I finally got around to drilling the shelf pin holes for the adjustable shelves. For some reason, I just never think to add these until like the very last step. But I used my shelf pin jig to drill shelf pin holes along the sides of the cabinet above the pull-out shelves. Then I installed the doors back onto the cabinet and added the knobs and pulls. And finally, as is always the last part that I remember to add, I cut the shelves to install into the cabinet on shelf pins. And with that, this simple storage cabinet was ready to deliver to my parents' house to place in their garage. I love that this is so easy to customize. You can opt for doing adjustable shelves all the way up or pull out drawer shelves for the whole cabinet. Or you can be indecisive like me and mix and match the 2. I can't wait to show you this project again in the updated garage space in the next video, so be sure to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already so that you don't miss it. And if you want to build one of these pantry cabinets of your own, be sure to grab the printable plans that I've linked in the video description with a bunch of tips for customizing it to fit your space and your needs. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!